Listen to timely advice from experts as we discuss all things leadership and technology. You'll get the inside scoop on better business practices, from making the most of your technology to leading a company with your head and heart. Pull up a seat with Marco CEO Jeff Gow and President Doug Albrechts. Let's tech.
Welcome back to another episode of Let's Tech. Today's subject is about working remotely or decentralized. And in the past year, many organizations we know have moved their workforce remotely and are learning how to foster and maintain a positive culture with a decentralized work environment. My guest today, I kind of happened across this because of a conversation I had with one of his colleagues about their approach to a decentralized workforce. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do, a little bit more about the topic. You know, the pandemic, of course, has had us test our abilities to work remotely, our disciplines to work remotely, and maybe on another hand, given us opportunities to do that. And in this particular case, my guest today, he's the CEO of CliftonLarsonAllen. Many of you probably heard of that. They're an accounting firm, one of the largest in the country. And I knew Denny before Denny was CEO and before they were one of the largest accounting firms. And so I've known their firm for a long time, and also thanks for being a client of ours. But Denny graduated from St. John's University. He's served numerous roles with CliftonLarsonAllen over the last 30 years. We're going to call it CLA as we go forward, that acronym. He's been the Chief Business Officer, Chief Practice Officer, Managing Partner for the Eastern Coast region, and Partner in charge of Healthcare Services in St. Louis. So he's had various jobs inside the organization. He spent a majority of his career serving the healthcare industry prior to joining CLA. He's an enthusiastic ambassador for the CLA Promise. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. They have a culture that emphasizes helping, not selling, and Denny takes the lead in demonstrating it. So with their focus on developing deep relationships with their clients, and when he's out not working, you can find him enjoying the outdoors, golfing, playing tennis, and biking. So I'd like to introduce Denny Schleper. Hi, Denny. Welcome.
Jeff, thank you so very much, and Happy New Year to you and all of your listeners. And I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to also congratulate you personally on your CEO role, as well as the tremendous success that Marco has had. But thank you for this invitation. Very much appreciate it.
Well, you know what? It's our honor to have you here, Denny. So before we get into it a little bit, again, background, a lot of us had to go to a decentralized approach. And Denny and his firm, CLA, got kind of an early start on this, and I called it decentralized. I kind of made that term up. But you'd lived in St. Cloud, and obviously you had numerous expansions. And I remember you worked here in the St. Cloud office, I believe, at one time, didn't you, Denny?
Yes, I did. Yep. Back from 1989 to 1995.
Yeah, God dang, that seems like a long time ago, probably because it was. And now you're CEO, and you work from Florida. It sounds like you get to pick where you want to live to some degree. And what about your other executives and your corporate headquarters? Tell me about this, the little story I heard about your decentralized or non-corporate office, per se, strategy that you had. Tell us more about that. That's interesting to me.
Well, I'd love to, Jeff. I think it is quite unique. If I would just compare it to any other professional service firm, or even if you just wanted to limit it to CPA firms within the country, I would say every last one of them would list a headquarters that they would have. And CLA does not list a headquarters. And we are pretty proud to say that we don't have a headquarters within the organization. It started actually back probably 6 years ago. We found ourselves expanding across the country. Today, we have about 130 office locations across the United States, and I would say affiliations outside of the country, not actual physical locations, but affiliations outside of the country. And as we started developing all of those locations, every organization, as you know, starts with culture. Everything starts with culture. And as I started examining the culture early on in my CEO role, what became clear to me is that a headquarters concept, as you expand, and we expanded pretty rapidly, was a negative. It was a negative in this way. As you mentioned, I had the opportunity to live in many different parts of the country during my career with CLA, and I was able to pick up the perspective of people that initially maybe you'd consider would not be in the headquarters. And that perception many times was a negative perception. It became an us or them kind of culture. And it just by the structure of a headquarters, it creates an us and them type of scenario. So I made it a point to say that we don't have a headquarters within the organization. And that kind of took a life of its own because it took someplace I would say I wasn't even expecting. And that is the concept of a headquarters became quite outdated. And I have fun with people today, publications, if I were to be interviewed, and they would ask me about our headquarters, and I would somewhat jokingly tell them that we don't have one. And then I would play a little game with them because they would quickly say, well, what do you mean you don't have a headquarters? And then I would ask them, well, tell me what a headquarters is. And of course, they'd say, well, your headquarters. And I said, yeah, I heard the word. I'm just not sure what it is.
Well, it's funny.
I just have a little bit of fun with it. But it really became our culture that no matter where you are in the organization, whatever office you sit in, 130 of them across the country, it doesn't matter. We're able to communicate together. As you know, in your industry, the use of technology allows you to do anything from any place. Our executives sit across the country in the 130 locations. We very strategically started moving our board meetings and all of our executive team meetings. We would rotate them across the country. So you're just simply flying. At the time when we were all flying, you would simply fly to a different location for all of the meetings, which gave you an opportunity to meet the people in those locations. So it started off more from a culture perspective, but then it transitioned to something that just made a lot of sense into how to operate.
So how do you, you're in Florida. Obviously, there's 49 other states to choose. How did you end up in Florida? Sounds like a pretty good place to be.
Well, I had to work my way south. I had the opportunity to start up our St. Louis location back in 1995. 7 years later, we started expanding in the Mid-Atlantic. So I moved to Philadelphia for 5 years as we were expanding in the Mid-Atlantic area. And we knew we wanted to be strong on the East Coast and hard to be strong on the East Coast without including Florida. So in 2007, it was another opportunity to relocate and help develop in the Florida marketplace. But all of it was expanding on what you referred to on that CLA Promise, which is heavy industry specialization, getting to know our clients, getting to help those clients, concentrating on owners of closely held businesses. That was really our marketplace. And so it was to help develop that in the new marketplaces themselves. And the sunshine certainly was an attractive additive to that.
Good execution, buddy. Way to go. Nice job. When we looked at some of us, not necessarily by choice, we had to go home. We had to work out of our homes, our home offices, our remote offices. And there's kind of three groups that we talk about. You have the remote worker, and that's somebody that maybe travels a lot for their job or their role. And that worker, can work just about any place. They can be in a hotel room, can be at their home office, but for the most part, they have an affiliation as a remote worker. And then you've got the mobile worker who probably has very little office at all. They might they might be strictly a mobile worker, meaning they don't really call home office, or their office that they would report to if you had a headquarters or a place to go to. They're just remote. And then you got the people that work in the office. Now you have these remote, the mobile on the move, and then you got the office workers. Like what percent or combination do you have of that group?
So to give you some idea of how that would be structured, what we try to do is make sure that the vast majority, so let's just say that would be in the 2/3 range, have the ability and the skill set to work on a mobile basis, as you defined it. We do have, I would say, a small percentage, maybe 5%, that are truly remote, that never come to an office. They don't even live near one of our 130 locations, but that'd be a small percentage. We try to make sure that as many of our people as possible can work in that mobile atmosphere. We did a little study. Obviously, you can test it to see how many people are signing in through your systems from within one of your offices. And at any given time, and this is pre the pandemic, we would only have around 56% of our people on any given day signing in through our systems within an office. Just to give you an idea of how many people would be in an office on a daily basis. I'll begin about 6 years ago, and for myself, this was a concept that started probably 15 to 20 years ago. I started realizing that the idea of being able to work mobily, as you defined it, requires certain skill sets. If I say we want 2/3 of our people to have those skill sets, the most important one is they've got to be able to be very proficient at technology. They have to know how to use technology. And so I always challenge myself. In fact, a little story, Jeff, I was sitting on a plane. I figured the guy was about 80 years old, and I always have a little habit of talking to the person next to me. So I saw that he was pulling out all of this technology in front of him, and much older than I was. And so I had to ask him, I said, can you just tell me your trick here? And he said, Denny, he says, ever since I've been in business and ever since I've been retired, my goal is I learn one technology item every single day, a new item. And I thought, that's impressive, but it really hit home to me that I have to stay up on technology. So 15, 20 years ago was the last time that I ever had a physical office within CLA. So there's 20 years ago, I gave that up. I said, it just doesn't make sense. If I do need to be in an office, I can work out of any location within that office. It doesn't matter. And obviously, with all the traveling that you and most of your listeners do, airplanes became a very good place to work as well from a mobile standpoint. And probably the other thing you had to do was become very self-sufficient. So, and I hate to use these words, but I'm going to go back, Jeff, when you and I were kids, they would have called them secretaries, right?
Sure, yep.
So that transition to all different types of, but however you want to label it, the assistant, the client service assistant, we've eliminated those within CLA. And I eliminated those about 3-4 years ago. We said, if you want to work within CLA, you have to have the skill sets to very bluntly do things on your own. You don't need these individuals, and to work mobily, you're going to have to do it yourself. And so all the little things that we eliminated, saying, you're going to have to do your own expense report. In our world, you're going to have to do your own time sheets. I write letters, I write emails, and something else that just fascinates me, Jeff, is I'll be on the line with other CEOs, sometimes within our industry, sometimes not. And so we're on the phone, we're talking. And we'll decide to line up another meeting, and they'll say to me, well, Denny, I'll have my person, whatever they call that, I'll have my person contact your person, and we'll line up that meeting. And I say, well, we're on the phone together. Can't we just line up our meeting right now? And so if they keep pushing it, I say, well, I'll connect you to my person. He's 6'4" and really good looking. And so that usually puts it.
You're talking about yourself again. God dang it. That's so not old school, by the way. That is totally not old school, which is very appropriate. We're having this discussion today, and we talk about technology and we talk about leadership. What a contemporary approach. What a different way of looking at it. And you're in an industry. If someone says accountant, I don't think people think right away contemporary. I think they think of, probably more formal, a corporate headquarters, a person, people to help. But I love the story here so far relating to a very non-old school, but a very contemporary. And the neat thing about it is you're doing it yourself too. So good job on that. And nice to hear that the 80-year-old gentleman sitting next to you was an inspiration to you as well. So tell me a little bit about, you could have the skills. Like some people, most people would have the skills if they take the time to apply them to be a good remote worker or a good mobile worker. But one of the things that comes into play here too, Danny, is personality. And I find I'll use myself as an example. I'm easily distracted. And so I haven't proven to be the best remote worker or home office worker. So I was one of those people that came into the office most days because I was either I was not disciplined enough or my personality wouldn't allow it. What have you kind of seen with these different type of personalities and how they kind of play into it? I mean, do you have suggestions or thoughts on that?
I looked at it as almost a three-step approach. A lot of our discussion so far has been on the first step, which is the culture that you try to create. The second step, then, once you feel like you've got a culture that's going to support this remoteness or this mobility, then you have to start working on processes. And the processes can be worked on, in a manufacturing industry, it would be known as the lean process.
Sure.
Of how do you become more efficient, eliminate waste, and so forth. In our world, we went with, I'm sure many of your listeners are aware of the ninja process, where we would bring usually young people together, put them in a room for 1 week or 2 weeks, and say completely blow up the process that we've been working under and figure out a new process that will work better for CLA, better for our clients, but also work better from this mobile remote environment. So we started doing that, fortunately, well before the pandemic, so that then the culture would be supported by the processes. And then once the processes were created that everyone would buy into, then the third step is you come up with the technology solutions to work with those processes. You don't put the technology first, as I think most people are aware of. That just follows to support the process that you've created. So back to your question then, for an individual, and we're all different, but if the culture supports it, the process is supported, and you implemented the right technology in order to support that process, it makes it easier for everyone. So even those that may struggle a little bit more, it's going to be easier for them. But ultimately, we will still have individuals that struggle too much. And therefore, we still have to create environments that work for everyone. So if a lot of times people talk to me about the future of the office space and so forth, there'll be individuals that work much better, as you described for yourself, within an office. So we're going to have to provide that. But we're also going to have to provide that mobile remote experience for people because it's what they're going to choose. So unfortunately, even when people say I'm going to downsize space, I'm not sure that is how I view the future, because I think social distancing will be with us for quite a while. And so you're always going to need enough space for the social distancing, but you also are going to need the space for the individuals that simply are more productive within an office space itself. So we have to work with everyone. I will say that as those individuals in our organizations that maybe adapt less to the technology, less to the process, very bluntly, those individuals tended to be a little bit more experienced, older, and they probably elect early retirement, to be very honest, because they admit to themselves they can't keep up with that culture, that process, and the technology.
I bet you see that when you integrate companies that you acquire too. You've got this culture, and it is not old school. It's very contemporary, and it keeps people on their toes, as it should. As a client, I would hope that the firm that I'm using would be like yours, and it is. So I bet when you do these acquisitions, you get this more experienced and probably even less experienced, but people that aren't as adaptable. How does that work? You buy a company and you got 50 new employees, and they find out, well, gee, you mean we have to follow those rules? We're going to use the ninja approach? What's that all about? Do you have a training or education process that you use, or integration process?
Jeff, just like Marco, we both organizations have done a lot of acquisitions in our history. So we both have experienced the struggles of that and the benefits of it. I used to always describe acquisitions as sometimes I feel people, they want to sell their house, but they don't want to move out of it. In other words, they're joining you for a very specific reason, but then they find that change to be difficult and they don't want to make the change. So some of it we realized up front, we just have to be very transparent on why are you joining CLA? Here are the benefits, but understand here's the change that's going to have to happen. So we got much better at laying out that game plan so that it was clear on the changes that would have to happen. We actually put it in our agreements so that it's reduced to writing. These are the changes that you will be making.
Good idea.
It helps, because you can always go back to and say, this was the agreement. We're just doing what we said we were going to do. A lot of the acquisitions we do, people have decided to create a very short run after the acquisition because they know they probably don't want to go through all of that struggle, and maybe they'll only want to stay for another year or two, and then they will exit. For those that want to stay on, I think they embrace the change. I have found that while all change can be difficult, I think they find it exciting, and I think they find that if it's new technology, more secure. I mean, obviously, we're living in a crazy world with security right now. If they find that it's more secure for them, they actually embrace it a great deal. So we try to be very transparent as here's the change that will occur. And then we implement that change as rapidly as possible. The old adage of, rip off the Band-Aid and go through all of the pain as fast as you can. What's that song? If you're going through hell, just keep on going. That's basically the approach.
Yeah, and it's. I think nothing is truer than change is great as long as it's happening to somebody else. And so we find during that orientation period today, it's going to be you. It's going to be your firm that you have to make some changes. And so good story. In fact, I took a couple notes from that. I think I'll apply them next time, and I'll blame you for it or thank you. So. Speaking of this work environment and personalities and culture, all cultures have a social aspect to it. And I've known the CLA firm for decades, and you guys certainly have a great culture and a great image, not only in your industry, but in the communities that you're in. The social aspect of work in a decentralized workplace, how do you kind of figure out how to make that happen if you're decentralized? Anything you can talk to us about on that for our listeners to have some ideas of what CLA does to keep things fun and shake it up a bit?
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree with you 100%. It's a critical part of any culture. I think for CLA, it's even magnified because we believe that we're in a relationship-based business. In other words, we don't sell physical goods like you do and so forth, even though a lot of your work is relationships as well. It also comes with certain products and so forth. Ours is just a relationship-based business. And even internally, we say it's a relationship-based business that we have to work together. 5-6 years ago, I also restructured the firm to be very much on a teams-based approach. Everything we do at CLA is based on operating within teams, and sometimes teams of teams, to continue to move that CLA promise forward. The relationship issue, we were putting so much effort into from a culture perspective pre-pandemic. I thought we were making very good progress. And then, of course, as you say, it changes. Well, some of the things that we had in place is we have an internal social media. I'm sure many of your listeners have this. We utilize Yammer. And we started testing our Yammer social network as to the usage of that, and compared it to other firms in our industry. And we were finding that close to 80 to 90% of our people, and we have about 7,000 people within CLA, 80 to 90% of them were active on Yammer, socializing with one another. Now, sometimes this was pure socialization outside of work, and other pieces of Yammer is more related to CLA and the work environment and so forth. But that really helped and continued to help us through the pandemic, was to keep the Yammer feed running and encourage people to continue to use that to stay connected as teams. The other thing we realize is that if we want the relationships, we're a Microsoft user, and so we utilize Teams as our main platform. And we all know that if you're utilizing Zoom or Teams or whatever you utilize, there's benefits to that, but there's clearly limitations to that. And building relationships on Teams, we have found to be difficult. So what we encouraged our leaders, and even through our coaching process, is we said, we need to have individual conversations with our people, individual contacts with them on a routine basis. We can't pull together 40 people on a Teams call and expect that we connected with 40 people. We didn't. We just simply had a 40-person Teams call. However, if that coach could be reaching out by phone, or Teams is fine as long as it's one-on-one, to really ask that individual, how are they doing? How's the family? How are the kids? How are things progressing? Obviously, health concerns. Are there health concerns? any of these types of things, we said we have to make those personal one-on-one connections to keep that relationship going. With all of that said, Jeff, I firmly believe that as soon as we can safely do it, we need to encourage all of our people to be back together in that office environment to the degree we had it pre-pandemic, to continue to build those relationships. I say to many of our CLA family members, I said, you can have a job from home. I'm not sure you can build a career from home. And so this can last for the period that it's lasting. I don't think it would work for us forever. And hopefully that won't have to be the case.
That very insightful. It's really been a pleasure getting your perspective, and really not just a perspective on what's happening real time here because of the pandemic, but the thought process that started years ago, and to see it work into your favor, and to have these kind of experiences to share with us. Super good information, very insightful. One last question for you. So, our business is in the office technology business, and the office can be at home, it can be on the road, it can be in a physical location. The tools are a lot the same. It's some version of a phone device or a voice type device. You have some version of data processing or data in computing, and then some version of video usually comes into play. So for us, whether you're mobile, you're at home, or you're in the office, we consider that to be the office. But what do you think the future of the office looks like from your perspective? And you have such a good one on it. What are you thinking for our listeners?
Well, I think it's going to be a continuous challenge, and it even relates to the generational issues that I think we're all well informed of. But we all know that the baby boomer generation is different than the Gen Y, different than millennials, different than the new Gen Z coming in. And if I use the Gen Z comparison to the millennial, it might be a good example of how I think things need to be in the future. We all know the millennial population was very much into the social networking, and we set up our offices to be very open and very social, and you can learn together in workrooms and so forth. Well, one of the Gen Z characteristics is they don't like that. They're not even utilizing social networking as much as millennials have, and they're looking for their own workstation or their own office. So it's reverting back again to kind of pre-millennial. And what that tells me is that if it relates to social distancing issues out of health concerns, which I mentioned earlier, I think will stick with us, or generational differences, we're going to have to provide everything as an organization. And every organization is going to have to do this. It's costly because you have to set yourself up so that the mobile or the remote worker has everything that they need. But you also are going to have to provide the office environment where the person that wants to be in the office or needs to be in the office has everything that they need in a safe environment as well. So I think we're going to have to do everything going forward, and we're going to have to accomplish and meet all of the generational needs that are out there, even beyond just the specific personal needs that we all have. So we're projecting going forward that our office spaces are not going to be cut down because of the reasons I mentioned earlier, but it's really because I think we're going to have to meet the needs of everyone within our workforce. And we know that the millennials are going to be making up the majority of that workforce, but Gen Z is coming right behind them. And Jeff, as us baby boomers eventually hit the beaches, they won't have to deal with us as much, but there'll still be an influence there.
That's great. Well, Denny Schleper, CEO of CliftonLarsonAllen, thank you for joining us today, and congratulations on your leadership in building a beautiful firm at the top of your industry. It's remarkable, and it's been a pleasure knowing you, and it was fun spending time with you here today. Look forward to seeing you again physically one of these days. So that's a wrap on this episode of Let's Tech. So if you haven't subscribed, we'd sure like you to do that. And also, if you like what you heard today, we'd like to hear from you. And as always, we appreciate your listening, and we look forward to the next session of Let's Tech.